Welcome back to 50 Days to Rebuild, the series where I do 50 minutes of exercise in a day and read 50 pages of a physio book. Today is day 10. Today was a great day. Had some difficulties with the exercise portion, but honestly, the learning side of things really made up for that. We'll start with the exercise portion. Basically ran through a lot of the same things as yesterday, really just trying to develop this sense of upward rotation with posterior scapular tilt and external rotation. That didn't go fully to plan, but it was okay. So following on from this idea of trying to do like a serratus wall slide because we want to get a simpler, less compound movement to strengthen that serratus, I sort of thought similarly around the external rotator, so that rotor cuff. This is not something new to me that I haven't tried before, but I thought I'd try a bit of it with this new cueing. Again, actually went alright. There wasn't really any too big of difficulties there. Some, pain, some difficulty maintaining stability, but for the most part, actually quite good. Then moving into the serratus exercise, felt pretty good until it didn't. So yesterday I talked about being rather conservative with the range. Today I thought I would go a little further. Basically just fails above, again, around that past 30 or 45 degree point. I'm thinking that this is likely actually something that I probably can't cue past, and it's more of just like a myofascial restriction, like tight muscle basically. So I think that'll tie into more of like the anatomy trains approach that I was trying to go down, so trying to release entire lines of tension. That's something I still have to investigate really how to do, but I think that's going to probably be necessary for trying to get overhead. That being said, I'm not struggling in the bird dog really, which is an overhead movement, but again, it is probably, like, I don't think you're meant to stop here, but I do. I'm probably stopping, before it cracks, before it gets poppy and clicky, which I think, to be fair, is maybe a little bit higher than my serratus wall slides going, but it's not too far off it. I did try and take this cueing and try and do a straight arm flexion exercise with a dowel. It did not go very well. Basically, the idea here is like I'm actually having a fair bit of success with extension, and I think it's important to try and balance out both sides. Straight away I got clicking in like both shoulders and elbows, so that wasn't great. And throughout the day I've had some elbow pain since. But afterwards it got a little better, but again it kind of got to like a similar point that the serratus wall slide got to. So this is good, but all of a sudden we're reaching a level of tension that we can't maintain good form through. Now beyond that flexion exercise, essentially everything that I've been doing has sort of been in service of the bench press. I was actually really struggling, unfortunately, today with that upward rotation cue that I was having a bit more success with the previous 2 days. Again, it worked okay. And I did try and experiment with some different ways to do this. So I actually used the slingshot, so one of Mark Bell's slingshots. It just like wraps around your arms and really tensions everything. I don't know if that helped or not. It kind of felt like it made it harder to cue, yet everything's also tighter, so it feels more stable. Like, a bit of a weird, contradictory thing. I think it's kind of just too tight for me, so that getting that upward rotation felt really tough to maintain, especially as I started actually like extending my elbows. That felt like borderline impossible. Now, even though I didn't have any success really with that today, I did watch a video afterwards once I completed my exercises around like how to cue some upward rotation. Was having some trouble finding this, and I remembered that the MSK neurology video I watched originally said it's somewhat like a lat spread, so thought I'd find some bodybuilders trying to explain how to do that. I think it was a Mark Bell video I found of some IFBB guy explaining how to lat spread. And the lat spread is not the right movement, is what I learned. But there was one thing he said that I thought was very important. He said he tries to move his armpits laterally. And I don't think I'm trying to move laterally, but I am trying to move by the armpit. I think that's a better cue. And even just like in standing now, as I try and sort of abduct the armpit, or like raise the armpit, it's like, oh, that feels a lot better. So I think I'm gonna try that tomorrow and see how that goes. Okay, getting into the learning, this is when things got really cool. God, I am so glad that I have stuck with this book. I thought about ditching it at several points, thought it was essentially below my level of understanding and not relevant, not what I'm seeking, but I was wrong. So two major things here. One was just general anatomical knowledge that I was glad to sort of challenge my understanding, and the other was playing into this problem that I want to solve of, can we move the spine or do we have to stabilize it? Can we do both? Because that's where I've been leaning, that there's some middle ground that needs to be found. And I think this is laying fertile ground for that. Let's start with the erector spine around how it contributes to this like moving of the spine. So erector spine, as it sounds, extends the spine. But it's also eccentrically, so lengthened, actively through flexion. But as we flex, it loses some of its ability to generate force. I believe they call it the moment arm, by about 10 to 20%. But as we come fully into flexion, it just turns off. It's no longer working to resist force. It's entirely on the fascia and the ligaments and the spine itself. And now this was, when I read McGill, like a big argument against flexion. The erector spine that buttresses that action is off, so now this is a more vulnerable position. Weird, interesting argument made in this book is that even though it's off, it's passively contributing to stability at essentially the same degree as when it was on, due to that connection with the thoracolumbar fascia. That's so strange. I don't really know why that's happening, but okay, that's an interesting point. It sounds like we can stabilize inflection to some degree. Then we come to the anti-fragility curve. Now this has sort of already been touched on, but there was an added piece added that I think changed a lot of my understanding of it. So it's a basic graph. We've got load on the bottom x-axis and health on the y-axis. It's almost linear, it curves a bit and sort of rounds off as we start to increase the load. Now, what it's saying here is essentially at the 0 point, right? So no stress is no health. We're gonna get atrophy. And as we go up with load, we're essentially gonna get more and more health. Again, it's not quite linear. It's kind of steep. But then it crashes off very suddenly when we go too much load and then we injure ourselves. And now the added picture here was almost like a little mini version of this graph. So like the same graph, just reduced in size of what happens when you're already injured. I loved this. So the reason I think this is so interesting is basically it's arguing that once you're injured, you still need to move. Nothing will be atrophy. So you have a smaller range of tolerable load and movement, but it's not nothing. And that's absolutely crucial. And if I think about what you should do when you hurt yourself. Now, the common protocol that's completely wrong is the Rice protocol. The guy that made it retracted it. It's completely wrong because it's built on a false premise of trying to reduce inflammation when we should be trying to speed the process up. It's to do with lymphatic fluid. It's fascinating, but somewhat separate. When you hurt yourself, the main thing you should do is induce movement. One of the reasons there is that helps pump lymphatic fluid, but also because movement is the key to life. It's what will generate or get it's what will get nutrient to the tissue. It's just crucial. The issue is we have such a minuscule window when we're injured. Now this is why someone like Kelly Starrett would use something like a H-wave technology. Don't quite understand what it is exactly. It's like a special TENS machine, way more expensive, way more effective, that's generating like slight tensions and like pulses in the muscle, almost like subperception. Like you can still kind of feel it, but it's not much, it's very low, right? And basically what that's saying, if we look at this graph, is we're playing in this tiny little corner near the 0 point, but not at 0, right? And the reason we're doing that, as I said, is to get movement. That's so important. And that's what we do for an acute injury, but why would we not want that for a chronic injury? Right? We're probably just avoiding it because we keep hurting it. And we probably go beyond what load is possible. So this plays into this idea I've been having, which is McGill or something approximating that, a stability approach. should be the starting point. Now, versus these ATG people, the knees over toes world, who I adore and respect, I think they're right. I think there should be movement, there should be articulation through all joints. But I don't think that should be the start. I think both sides are right and both sides are wrong here. And to be fair, I think Ben Patrick is likely cottoning onto this and is close. I saw a video of his a couple weeks ago where he said that the main function of the back, he believes, is to resist motion, which ties into that idea. That's very different from what he's saying around needing to do something like a Jefferson curl, right? It sounds like he's closing in on that middle ground, which is good to hear. So if I tie this idea of, okay, we need to stabilize first, but then we need to do some of these movements, it's like, but how do we not jump to the point where we cascade off the edge of this graph because we've overloaded? And that ties into the next section, which was different poses that are low load on the spine. Now, I did go through the McGill Big 3 and planking and doing like some advanced McGill Big 3 stuff. Already known that, but just cool to see that, support of that. Then ran through low locust, child's pose, sphinx, cat-cow, butterfly, and banana asana or bananasana. Also, with any of these poses, there were different ways of doing it. So like supporting the chest with like a pillow, for example, so that the load of the upper body is taken off the load of the lower spine. So again, we can reduce load. Now, as the author is saying here, we're going to induce some sort of creep. So basically some weakness if we stay in like a flexed pose, for example. So again, following on from like a counter pose is do some extension after flexion, for example. But also he said that compression can help, which is really interesting because when I've considered doing some of this work, my thoughts were start with McGill Big 3 so my spine is better and healthy. Do some of this stuff, then do McGill Big 3, which is relatively high compression work. It could be much higher, but relatively high, to restabilize. Now, the examples he gave here is around doing something like a tree pose or warrior's pose. So I don't know if McGill's Big 3 after it would be best, but that would be compressing. So that can help bring the spine back to normal and healthy again, basically. The next thing that I thought was just awesome was a reference to a study where, I think it's just epidemiological, but they're looking at athletes that flex a lot and that they don't have more pain than the general population, like low back pain. And that when they do experience that pain, they heal faster. Like, that sounds like the strongest argument for taking it through range. And the last thing on this topic was one of McGill's students, actually, his recommendations around yoga poses. And the one that I'll note on here was don't go through flexion if it induces pain. That's very McGill-esque. But it wasn't just don't do it. It was don't do it, heal, slowly introduce flexion with no load. And that's where my mind is. I don't know if I'm ready for it yet, but I've been doing McGill. I'm way more stable. I can feel it. I can feel it in the duration it takes to experience pain with sitting. It's fantastic. I am blessed to be here in this way, but that could be the next step. And seeing someone who subscribes to the same ideology around McGill then progress past that is exciting. And this is the biggest motivator also to read McGill's next book, Ultimate Back Health and Fitness, which is he deemed as like higher risk and the next step up from the first 3 levels of the McGill method. Moving on, I just want to gun through a few anatomy things I thought were really cool, because when I've studied anatomy, there's lots of conflicting information, and some of this could be conflicting and wrong, but I just thought it was cool. So the psoas, I've often been told it flexes the lumbar spine. Apparently the moment arm is such that essentially if it can, it's really weak at it. Also, I've been told it's an external rotator. Yes, but it has to be abducted first. The quadratus lumborum, big muscles on the back/side of your spine. They are lateral flexors, yes, but apparently they help extend and therefore stabilize the spine. Awesome. The lats, I knew they extend the arm, but apparently they extend the spine, which makes so much sense because I feel them stabilizing me all the time. And they're the main buttress against hinges, especially like a low thoracic hinge, which was an issue for me not too long ago. Might still be, but again, I think from doing lat work, it's been less of an issue. So that's awesome. When doing back extension, and I guess this ties into the previous points, apparently some of the main movers of that actually aren't the lower back muscles, it's the upper portion of the erector spine, which is interesting. It's like the thoracic section is the main section moving the lower section. Also, if we're flexing or extending, we're increasing the available range for rotation, but if we're doing this, we're also increasing the load there, so bit of a give and take relationship. Maybe worth avoiding, but it's good to know that's how to get some extra range. Also, lateral flexion, which is something that I thought might be a good starting point, apparently the same amount of load on the facet joints as extension, so probably not the best starting point, especially because it's asymmetric. So, and I think extension will probably be my biggest issue given that I have spondy and fractured facets, but that's, yeah, maybe flexion should be the starting point. Oh, there was a discussion about bracing and over bracing, and I think I'm probably guilty of this in some situations, but kind of made sense. So often bracing is discussed in terms of guy wires on a flexible pole being the stabilizer, but if you flex one wire too much, everything else is going to be made way harder. It's like, oh, and that plays into the tensegrity model from anatomy train. So yeah, if you're over bracing, how is everything else going to function? And I think sometimes when I experiment with movements before I brace, I'm like, oh, I can do shoulder flexion or something like that. Then I brace, and it's like, well, maybe I'm compensating, but also maybe I'm over bracing. So that's quite intriguing. That could help influence some of the exercises I want to be able to do. Along a similar vein, if we co-contract when we're doing certain like yoga exercises, which was highly recommended to stabilize the joint, it will reduce range of motion while stabilizing. So again, there's a give and take. Also, I think that's just a really important thing to add. A flat lower back is actually a maximally extended low back. It is not neutral. So a flat back is essentially a terrible cue. If you imagine that you're sitting on your heels and then you came up, so you're directly, like femurs are vertical, that's your starting point. Brace from there and then try and come back to sit on your heels and back and forth and back and forth. That was the recommendation around practicing to hip hinge, and eventually taking that to a half forward fold, which is essentially just a hip hinge, and then eventually a forward fold. Now they did specify it is actually impossible at the very end of a forward fold to not flex the spine, but that also the load at the very end is apparently quite low. So actually could be a relatively low risk way of going about it. They did say there was a big argument around should you bend the knees or not. If you have like a low back issue like spondy, probably. Yeah, a lot of information. I am really grateful that I stuck through it with this book. I've probably got 2 days left before I finish it. Yeah, for anybody watching and listening to me talk a lot of jargon, thanks for watching. I hope it's nice to see the process and some progress. Yeah, this is day 10. Have a good one.